You're back with Get Connected. Mike Agarbo here with John Beeler. Want to bring on a guest we've had on in the past. His name is Eugene Suyu. He is the CEO and co-founder behind Tinkerine Studios. They're a company that makes really cool 3D printers for the education market. Well, he's just got a Health Canada go-ahead to manufacture medical supplies, which I think during this time when there are shortages is a good thing. Thanks for joining us, Eugene.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So tell us what this is all about. You've got a certification from Health Canada. What can you actually make?
Well, we got the Class 1 medical establishment license, and that limits us to anything that's considered a Class 1 device. They've outlined what they are. I don't have that off the top of my head. I do believe it's face shields, face masks, and it's limited to a couple things, but things like gloves and gowns are still considered Class 2.
And how, do you have to retool your manufacturing process, obviously, to start making these? How does that all work?
Yeah, well, it doesn't feel like it's too far from what we do. We still use 3D printing. We still use some of the laser cutter equipment that we have in-house to cut out the visor shield portion. But we do have to retool for packaging, and we do have to retool for what it is that we're actually building. So instead of building complex robotic machines, we're now making what we consider to be relatively simple shields.
Well, it sounds simple, but I just look at during this crisis, governments are leaning on different companies to switch up what they typically make. Down in the U.S., they're getting GM and Ford to make ventilators,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just wondering, how does a car company go to making ventilators? I mean, there's a whole shift, in I guess expertise and just from the manufacturing process, to get an assembly line that makes cars to make ventilators. That's the whole thing. How long do you think it's going to take you just to make, basic face shields, to retool your facility to do that?
Well, we're doing it already now. And you do
That
it
was
in
fast.
increments. Yeah, you do it as fast as you can, and you do it in increments. So, when we first looked at doing this 3 weeks ago, it was a simple company initiative to make a couple. And when we say a couple, we're talking about 50 to 100 at a time. But we really quickly realized that we needed to at least hit 100 a day if we wanted to make any impact. And so we did that within probably a couple of days. We moved a couple workbenches around. We moved all the 3D printers we had downstairs into the warehouse production area. And then we tried to look for as much material as we could from the plastic suppliers. But then you quickly realize that 100 a day is not a lot. And so we retooled again, and we went to 240 and then a day. And then we looked at the equation from just the company's perspective. We used to 3D print these brackets that took an hour, and we realized really quickly that these brackets take too much time. And if we wanted to do anything of scale, we need to either remove the brackets altogether or make them really, really small so that we can do them in 5-10 minutes. And so we redid the design again. The design team and I kind of jumped in all arms on deck. And we are now at a capacity of about 1,000 a day if we really wanted to push all the machines to run 24/7. In one shift alone, we can get about 900 or so sets of these clips. So it's just a constant retooling. It's not an overnight thing. It probably won't be for anyone that's doing this. And it's a lot about the supply chain because, going from making car parts to making delicate electronics that can, monitor airflow and all that stuff, they have some of the technologies already, but it's deploying it in a totally different way. And yeah, a lot of it will come from supply chain, just making sure they have new components to do this as well.
Eugene, one of the things we talked about previously about sort of makers getting involved in 3D printing of medical equipment is the sterility of these parts once they've been made.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of hobbyist 3D printers, they're in garages, that kind of thing. Can you talk about what you've had to do to sort of get certified and address that aspect of things, but also some of the challenges that we're seeing in the communities with 3D printed medical equipment?
Yeah, so sterilization is pretty big. I think the sense that I get is there are companies out there, and there's obviously groups of makers, ourselves included as one of those companies. We're all wanting to help in some way, shape, or form, and the intention is all the same. We want to get these protective gear to frontline healthcare workers. The concern is always around, you're making an impact or trying to make an impact, but then you end up being, asymptomatic, and then you end up transmitting the actual virus over to, the healthcare workers that are going to get these PPEs. And so for us, we look at it from a pure liability perspective. So, can the company afford to do this, number one? And if we can, what procedural stuff can we put in place? And so that is full sanitization of the actual manufacturing floor every 3 to 5 days, depending on the activity that's happening and if we're getting deliveries. That is a full sanitization of or isolation of the finished part. So how long does it sit on the shelf for? Because we know this virus has a shelf life on plastics. How we handle these plastics as they get printed, as they come off, gloves, masks, do we wear shields ourselves? All these procedural stuff are super important, at least for a company. And, I would also venture to say for any maker, hacker groups out there, they ought to be looking at the same things. Just the intentions of helping alone isn't enough. If you start to become the organization that helps vector the virus into, the healthcare workers, that's the worst thing that we could do for a moment like this.
You talked about the supply chain. So you're going to make some face masks for healthcare workers. How difficult is it to get all the supplies for that? Obviously, it's mostly plastic, I would assume, but how quickly can you get that material?
It's becoming more difficult. If you asked me that 3 weeks ago when we put the announcement out that we were doing this, we single-handedly swooped up every single piece of 4x8 PETG in Vancouver. I just called around, and there wasn't a lot of sheets to begin with, and so we became overnight the biggest source of PETG in the Greater Vancouver region. It's getting harder because majority of these supplies are being manufactured in the U.S. and there is a huge demand for this material down in the U.S. just for their own population alone. We've seen that the wait times are now starting to get longer. So if you weren't in the queue for materials, it's now going to take 4 to 8 weeks to just for the visor shield material. But the key with supply chain is to make things simple, right? Looking for a standardized part and not introduce other complexities in place. So we 3D print 3 components, and we have 3 additional components, one of which is foam for covering kind of the forehead portion so that it's sealed. And then one is the visor, and one is the elastic that goes behind the head. And that's it. We wear about 3 outside components, and then we take care of 3 of our own. We may end up going with a process of injection molding or extrusion for the clips on the side of the shield, just for scale if we need to. But there seems to be an okay supply of everything but the visor material, and I think that's just because everyone is also doing it. The supply is just getting pulled right out of the chain from all these maker groups, companies, us, and even larger companies like Bauer.
So my next question, a few weeks ago, you've decided to get into this to help during this health crisis, and you're figuring out how to make these face masks on scale. You know what I mean? Like instead of like 5 a day, you want to do hundreds or even thousands of them. Mm-hmm. So once you get that issue solved, and hopefully you've got enough material for a while, how do you get it to the front line then? Like, do the hospitals approach you? Do you approach the hospitals? Does Health Canada broker that? How does that all work?
A little bit of everything. you know, we have tried really, really hard, and the team here has done, I think, a really great job of reaching out to hospitals and even just family physicians. We've classified for ourselves what it means to to serve the frontline essential workers. So we broke it down into two categories. The first category being anyone in healthcare. So that means it's the doctors, the nurses, everyone inside hospitals. But it also extends outside into the people that are in the pharmacists, because I know that a lot of the times they're not getting, the proper equipment and the attention. It's also the firefighters and the paramedics, because they're being sent into the homes, and also people aren't really, thinking about that. So we've classified those areas as what we would consider level one. And then level twos are all the other essential workers. So the grocery stores, do they need protection as well? They are dealing with people, and so they ought to be connected, right? And protected. And so, the way that the reason why we built these two levels is because, if it gets worse and we only have, let's say, 5,000 face shields to be able to provide people, we want to be able to make the proper call. Do we allocate all 5,000 to these level one workers, or do we, split it 50-50? Our choice would most definitely go towards supplying this all for level one healthcare workers in this scenario.
And I want to talk about the money aspect now, because a lot of small businesses and even large corporations are switching their manufacturing and production lines. What does this do to your bottom line? Like, this isn't obviously a big money maker, right?
No, it does have an element of profit built into the business model. We are a for-profit business at the end of the day, and the way that we are looking at this is fairly simple. At least we think it's fairly simple. A device like PPE or any product really needs to have some form of revenue built in, so that we are able to continue to grow this in scale. If we were just donating this, we could donate maybe a couple thousand, a couple tens of thousands, and then call it a day, because the funds are gone, or the allocation of funds just won't be there. If we want to continue to provide additional shields for people for a duration of time to come, then building profit margin into this that allows us to continue to do this, I think it's one of the only ways to do it, to be able to continue to do this at scale. Now, unless there is funding that comes through from the government side of things, right? Federal government or provincial government says, you know what, we need 10,000, 15,000 plus or more of these shields to go to every hospital, every nurse, every doctor, and we will fund it. Until that happens, as a company, we have to do this. So securing securing funding is important. We're looking into that as a company. As it is right now, the company is actually putting all of its capital resources behind a project like this. And yeah, there is a profit margin built in. But it's not significant. We're not, one of the things that we want to do is to make sure that we're not going out there and, taking advantage of the times, the fact that these are in, super high demand and making a 2,000% a profit margin in our product. No, it's still built in properly, like a normal business would have a product, and we're not looking to take advantage of the situation.
And I guess my last question here, and we just got a minute left. How is the coordination? I mean, I imagine there's a lot of small companies, businesses like yours that are in the manufacturing business. How do you find the coordination from a health level, so that you can get these face shields out to hospital workers or firefighters? Like, it seems like you've had to kind of try a few different ways. Could there be better coordination in the future, do you think?
Yeah. I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is the fact that there isn't a lot of coordination. So everyone is kind of running around trying to figure things out. It could be the cities, it could be the hospitals themselves. But ideally, under normal circumstances, most of these PPEs are handled at a centralized, government level. This is not typically done at the individual hospital level. So, I do know that the government here in BC is trying to put something together that allows proper procurement, and it just hasn't fully come into fruition yet. And so, we are working with the individual hospitals, the individual physicians, and the clinics, because everyone wants to be a little bit ahead of the curve in case it gets bad, right? And it does add a significant amount more manpower to do individual outreach to doctors, physicians, regional hospitals. But it's got to be done, and we're taking it and we're doing it, and it absolutely makes sense to. So we'll continue to do that until something more centralized comes around.
We've been talking with Eugene Suyu. He is the co-founder and CEO behind Tinkerine Studios here in British Columbia. They've just got Health Canada license to make things like face shields and some basic medical supplies, and just finding out how he's going through the different challenges of doing that. Thanks again for joining us, Eugene.
Yeah, that was fun.